Assalamu alaikum, hello and welcome to The Health Show, here only on the Islam channel with me, Alistair Greener. Tackling health problems every week, we're joined by a health expert within their specialised field who discusses the prevention of health issues or concerns that we or our loved ones may face. Looking at how you can change your health and lifestyle for the better, The Health Show offers an alternative viewpoint from our health experts who attend the show. And we really hope that this will help guide you in the right direction. So if you suffer from any medical issues or have any health concerns, or for that matter, if you know anybody who does, then tune in each week as we'll be covering a wide range of topics and offering alternative viewpoints from our health experts. If you'd like any further information on our programme or any of the topics that we discuss, then please do get in touch at healthshow@islamchannel.tv. And again, we'll give you that address at the end of the show. Today, we're bringing you a sensitive but very important subject, which some may find difficult to discuss or even be open to discussing, and that's male depression. To help us, it's a pleasure to welcome Mr. Saidat Khan, a highly qualified humanistic integrative psychotherapist. He's a psychosexual and relationship therapist, as well as an addiction specialist who helps individuals, couples, families and groups gain the psychological awareness they need to improve their health and well-being. Mr. Khan has a wealth of experience working with people from all kinds of cultural backgrounds, faiths and sexual orientation. He provides therapies, he's commissioned health services, and he's also developed primary care GP services within the NHS. Lovely to see you, Mr. Khan. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Lots to talk about, and it is a really sensitive but incredibly important subject, so I'm really looking forward to talking more in a moment. Now, post-traumatic stress disorder, commonly known as PTSD, and traumatic brain injuries are two afflictions that are common among veterans of the US Army. As they cope with the difficult return to civilian life, veterans have an added challenge. In their former military culture, asking for help could be seen as showing weakness. Psychological support groups like the Dwyer Project have been multiplying across the United States. They help men and women overcome their problems and thoughts of suicide. Here's a short clip about Joseph P. Dwyer Veterans Peer Support Project, which hosted a wellness day at a park in the coastal village of Santa Mauritius.
Just because things went sideways after I came home, but if the proper resources were there when we came home, we wouldn't be in this position to begin with. You know, like we wouldn't have turned to drugs, we wouldn't have turned to alcoholism, homelessness wouldn't have came into play. Because when I came home in 2008 from my deployment from Kosovo, it was, we love you, here's a bumper sticker, did you see the commercial, here's a little American flag, no, I'm not giving you a job and you cannot date my daughter.
I think we're all increasing in our awareness, and that's a good thing. I think that the VA is increasing in awareness, but I think the American public and society as a whole is increasing in awareness, and that is an awareness of the fact that suicide is not just a veteran issue, it is a national and international issue.
Well, it took me a while to see a therapist, to realize that I need help and assistance mentally with transitioning, as well as with my issues with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. But just like how this Dwyer Project should have been built, made up back in World War I, World War II, it's the same thing like veterans care. It should have been better way back then, and we should be having the best care.
It's fascinating watching that piece, Mr. Khan, because we have come a long way when it comes to mental health. The fact that centres like this exist now, the fact that we're having the conversation. Why do you think it's taken us so long to have the conversation about mental health, but in particular male mental health?
Well, I mean, I think that varies because I think there's a big drive in getting people into the army, you know, to join the armed forces, but then actually you've got to think about why people join the army anyway in the first place, you know, and it's that sense of sort of identity and a sense of belonging to be in the army. It's their family, and then when they come out, you know, hopefully come out successfully through the army. There's if they've been to war, for example, or sort of face conflict, and they've come back, then they need to be integrated back into society because they've lost the family and the connection they've had. And the reason why they went into the army was specifically for that reason. When they come out, they're left on their own. But I think funding has a big part to play in it. I think generally it's the sort of the attraction, not the attraction, but you know, the interventions. I think it's just politically wrong, you know, for governments not to think about, you know, veterans when they come out of war-torn countries and war and stuff.
But of course, we're talking about this going far beyond just the military.
Yeah.
Male depression, you know, the statistics of the chances of a young man dying before the age of, I think, 30 or something, is going to be predominantly down to suicide or something, which is obviously a sign of mental health as well. So this is a very broad problem. And I'd like to start off really by talking about the differences really between male depression and female depression. We hear about mental health from all sides. What's specific and what's different about male mental health and male depression?
Well, with men, I mean, we are seen as providers, so we are role models for our families and, you know, people around us who we care for. So when that's taken away, you know, it impacts on our psychological well-being. With women, I think they're able to, they have the ability to manage their emotions differently than men, and I think men place a lot of pressure on themselves around who they are and what they should be doing.
And of course, that's massive in different cultures, isn't it? You know, some cultures that's even more heightened, isn't it, in terms of expectation? And that seems to be a lot of the issue here, isn't it? That there's expectation in all sorts of areas of men's lives that maybe sometimes they feel difficulty in measuring up to.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're in a cultural background where you're expected, you know, to be a particular type of person, but actually you have different values and beliefs, and you want to pursue certain things, certain areas in your life, and you can't, then the expectation goes against your own inner belief of what you want to do as a human being, as a man as well. You know, and I'm not saying going against, you know, cultural beliefs and stuff, but we all have our own sort of embedded stuff that we need to, you know, come to terms with. You know, but you know, family expectation's a big one, especially in cultural environments. You know, it's a cultural thing that, you know, the elder son has a role, and the younger one has a role, and the females have roles as well. And when you take that away, it's actually sometimes if you can't meet the expectation, then what do you turn to?
And it's interesting, I know many people who are watching the show today will completely understand what you're talking about and will relate to that. When it comes to depression or something not quite right with someone's mental health, and if we look at men particularly, because men are very good at covering up, you know, what their inner feelings are, because as we saw in the clip there, it might be seen as weakness. How might someone spot it in somebody else? So let's say, for example, somebody's partner, relative, or somebody at home spots something different in an individual. How does it manifest itself?
Well, I think with men, you said earlier on as well, you know, you mentioned that men, we sort of contain our emotions a lot different from females. And I think it's noticing the behaviour of a person. So you can, it's sort of observing what your husband or your partner's like sort of one day, and then all of a sudden you can see the drastic or sort of imminent changes. And that can be around just social isolation, about withdrawal from the family or loved ones, not talking, changes in behaviour around the patterns of behaviour that changes. And I'm talking about, because what you said earlier on as well is that men have a good way of coping with their emotions. Well, actually, men have different coping mechanisms as well. And I think, men turn to unhealthy behaviours to cope with those emotions. So identifying, noticing changes in a person's behaviour, monitoring, their sort of physical state, looking at whether they look withdrawn, whether you can contact, you can make contact with them, you can talk about sensitive stuff, how sort of sensitive are they agitated?
And it's important, really, isn't it, to distinguish between somebody having a bad day or maybe experiencing a bit of stress at work to something which is over a more prolonged period of time.
It is, yeah. I mean, sometimes with depression, people don't know they're falling into depression. All they know is they just fall, their world spirals downwards, and they don't know how to climb back up.
And what will an individual be feeling? How will their emotions change if they are in this spiral that you talk about?
Okay, they might. There'll be a lot of fear. So with fear comes the flight or fight syndrome. So they would normally want to fly and not face, or they want to fight and defend themselves. So aggressive, agitated behaviour, confrontational, all those types of negative reactions. People can see it and notice.
And just looking at the younger generation for a moment, we'll talk about the older generation in a while, but for the younger generation, of course, there's a whole load of new pressures, aren't there? There seems to be a heightened pressure towards getting your qualifications. Then, of course, we have social media where young lads just can't escape any form of peer pressure. Do you think that's making things more challenging?
It is, but actually the social media is escapism as well. So in one sense, it's you're getting pressure from social media, but it's also an escapism as well. For a lot of young people. I think peer pressure is a big one in terms of social drug use, because there are a lot of drugs out there now that can be sort of obtained through the internet, and Class A drugs are widely available, but also in terms of cannabis smoking, it seems like it's the norm for young people to smoke.
And looking at different things that people might have as a particular issue, many people will have been brought up in a culture where they don't talk about it. The younger generation, hopefully because of intervention by celebrities, even the royal family, are talking about it. So hopefully younger people feel more comfortable about dealing with it. But there's older people who've never done that before. They've never dreamt of discussing their problems before. How do we break down those barriers where it's almost ingrained in them not to discuss and to seek help?
Well, I think that goes back down to education, with sort of the older generation, to sort of form those bridges with their children, and this, because most of the time the younger generation, if they're using drugs or using unhealthy behaviours, and they won't want to tell their parents or their family, because most of the time the family's part of the problem, and their sort of immediate reaction is that they're going to be judged and told off, because the parents' expectation is that you don't do certain things, because it's not only a good image for them but also for the community.
And that's a real key thing, isn't it? And that's almost adds to the pressure as well. So being able to seek independent help is such a massive thing. And we're going to talk more about the counselling services and the services that you offer in a while. But I really want to get to a little bit more of the detail of what's behind all of this, what's behind the pressure, the peer pressure and so on. And what about older men, who suddenly, they've seemed on the outside to be going along, getting on with their regular life, but actually there's something niggling away inside of them. What sort of concerns are they having? What's leading to their depression?
It could be a variety of different things, because the older generation is like, in terms of relationships and marriages, I come across, people who from white UK backgrounds, in my practice, where actually the relationships broke down because the project's finished. So underneath that, it's actually the stuff that, the things that are causing the sort of barriers in the relationship or the conflict in the relationship later on in life were actually prevalent at the beginning, but they were masked over because actually it's your right to get married, and you have to meet the expectation of your family and lead a sort of a productive life by being a responsible father, etc., and raise a family.
And of course, in many cultures, the pressure to stay in a marriage, even though it might not be a happy marriage, there might be problems with it, pressures to stay in it can, I presume, be quite stressful.
Yeah, and nowadays, sadly to say, the pressures of today, they're varied, because now it's got a lot to do with sort of loneliness and isolation, but also property and money. That comes into play as well, and sometimes it's more difficult for people to actually address an issue, because it might open up a can of worms, and then it's easier just to carry on. But then what happens is two people sort of live separate lives within a family or in a relationship, and they work out what's best for them.
And that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because many relationships, they will cope, they will have, as some people might call it, a marriage of convenience almost, where they'll stay together for the sake of children or sake of maybe cultural pressures. Some people will cope with that, but some won't. At what point does it become clear that people aren't coping with the change of circumstances? They're not coping with the relationship breakdown?
Well, it's constant conflict. And revisiting, it's just sort of going around the houses, so to speak, with the same sort of minor issues that they can't solve, and then it becomes a constant battle, because it's an emotional strain, on the individuals. But normally, what happens is that other influences, sort of come to light, and I'm talking about whether it's drugs or alcohol use, or whether it's, having sort of activity, partnerships outside of the marriage or the relationship.
One of the challenges often for people who maybe have been married a long time is there's a natural process where people actually become slightly different people than they were maybe when they first got together, because everyone matures, everyone sort of adapts to changing lifestyles and things. Those can be quite difficult to handle, can't they?
But they only become different people if the couple allows it to happen. In a relationship, two people have responsibility, to sort of keep the relationship on an equal sort of platform.
And this is a really important point, because what you're implying there is within a relationship, it's about talking to another, being honest with one another, so that actually each of you understands where the other person might be going in their thinking and their thought processes. If that relationship, because this is something that I know you deal with a lot, if that relationship has got to a point where that communication isn't happening, how does that affect someone's mental health?
Well, it does. It affects it, in a big way, because if you can't communicate effectively with the person you're with, and you find that a struggle for whatever reason, because the dynamic is so intense that you don't find a way past it, then yes, that's going to cause. What it does, it triggers off all childhood sort of primitive feelings and emotions. So normally what happens, it takes people back to their we call it a child ego state of childhood, and they're sort of trapped in that place. So the depression spirals from there. And
that's interesting you talk about, childhood, because many things people actually, you hear about people keeping pent up childhood experiences that might have been particularly negative for whatever reason, that actually it only manifests itself later on in life. Is that something that you see?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And I think what I normally see a lot of is is a lot of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse within families. You know, so and these sort of stuff and these sort of areas, you know, of abuse, you know, they are in every community. You know, so you know they're not, you know, South Asian community. You know, they're not sort of, you know, they're not. What's the word I'm looking for? They're not.
They're certainly not unique in
They're not unique
their
in this
circumstances,
because
are they?
it happens. So what normally happens with especially South Asian people is that they come in and then all of a sudden they start to build the relationship and they begin to expose their inner feelings and their inner experiences, and you'll be surprised how you know how much of the 3 abuse areas that I've mentioned come out in.
That's a really interesting thing, isn't it? Because people would appear to somehow have dealt with whatever problems they've had, and they've developed some form of coping mechanism. But yet, in middle age, sometimes all of a sudden it breaks down.
Yeah.
What are those triggers that will make that happen, that will suddenly make someone who apparently seems to be absolutely fine, but all of a sudden they go into this depression, they go into this, almost suicidal thoughts?
Well, it's like a pressure cooker, and it slowly sort of builds up pressure over time. So we're human beings, and we can only contain and manage our emotions to a certain extent. So we use different types of coping mechanisms, whether it's, if you say like a healthy guy who goes to work and stuff, well, their coping mechanism to deal with emotions might be to overwork, because their expectation is that they look after the family. So in retrospect, what happens is that it becomes damaging because they're overworking. So they can only overwork to a certain point, and then what happens is the lid comes off. When the lid comes off, it's like they don't know how to contain it.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because that's exactly what we're going to be talking about after the break. We've talked a lot about the causes of depression, whether it's from military service all the way through to different things that happens throughout one's life. In the second half, we're going to talk more about the help that's available and how people can overcome, and more importantly, how other people can help those individuals overcome as well. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we must stress that should you suffer from any medical problems or health concerns, it's always highly advisable and recommended that you contact your doctor or GP, as the Health Show gives you an alternative viewpoint to the health concern being discussed. Join us after the break, when we'll be talking more about today's topic of male depression and how you can get help. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Health Show, where we've been discussing male depression with Mr. Saidat Khan, who is a psychotherapist and helps people who have particular problems when it comes to male depression. Now, it's a market that may seem paradoxical, but it's actually flourishing. Yes, online meditation or relaxation applications are multiplying. Petite Bamboo, the French-speaking leader, now has 3 million users, and Headspace, the leader in the Anglo-Saxon world that was co-founded by a former Buddhist monk, has arrived in France.
We see reductions in anxiety, reductions in depressive symptoms, as well as improvements in how we act and treat others. For example, Headspace specifically has been shown to promote more compassionate behavior, so to treat other people with more compassion, as well as to reduce aggression and reduce irritability.
I think part of the challenge is you have to meet people where they are, and the truth is that everyone's on their phones all the time. So it makes sense to try and meet them where they're spending most of their time. So although there is the irony that the phone's probably causing us a lot of our stress, our hope is that by using Headspace, you'll be able to teach yourself the techniques that you need to learn in order to be able to use your phone in a more mindful way.
On est très agréablement surpris de voir qu'un certain nombre de médecins, voire de psy, conseillent Petit Bambou à leurs patients. Alors après, attention, hein, la méditation de pleine conscience et encore plus via une application ne se substitue pas ni à une thérapie particulière, ni à même un stage de méditation. C'est vraiment un outil de complément pour ancrer l'habitude de la méditation dans son quotidien, chez soi, de façon pratique et accessible. Aujourd'hui, on est toujours indépendant, uniquement possédé par les deux fondateurs et les employés, ce qui est une vraie chance en fait pour rester complètement aligné et proche de l'authenticité de ce que l'on veut faire, parce que ce projet, on l'a fait aussi pour avoir plus de sens dans nos vies et avoir plus d'impact sur la vie des gens.
So, Mr. Khan, it's great to see some of the therapies that are out there, and certainly when it comes to meditation and mindfulness, that seems to be very much the kind of buzzwords we're hearing about at the moment. Do you, in your experience, find that people are actually coming to you, they're being a little bit more open, they do have more of an acceptance towards seeking help like this?
Yeah. I mean, in my therapy, I advocate a headspace anyway because I find it very effective, and it's another tool for people to try. Sometimes it doesn't fit with everyone, but for the ones that have tried it and they like it, it really works, and they get attached to something. So it's a real sort of mechanism for change because it's about changing the thought process.
And when we talk about youngsters, you know, today we seem to have a more open relationship between parents and children where things are discussed maybe that weren't discussed in previous generations. But that's not necessarily the case in every culture, is it?
Yeah. No, not at all. I think it all depends on, depends on culture and religion as well, because sometimes these sort of headspace applications and stuff, they won't be seen as sort of productive tools for change or to sort of to manage one's anxiety. So there's that part that plays in that, but it is very effective, and it's the way I see it in my therapy is whatever works for the person, then they should use that.
And that's the real key, isn't it? So let's talk about the therapies. Let's say that there's somebody who's watching who maybe is in this downward spiral that you described in the first half, or maybe you're a loved one of someone that you see this happening to. What's the first stage of seeking help? What's the first thing that one should do?
I think it's to take away any judgment. So not to, so if it's a loved one, or a partner or a member of family, it's easy to sometimes culturally, family culture, it's they behave or they say things in a particular way that comes across critical and too direct. So it's about sort of being empathetic with the person. So tapping into empathy, your own empathy in the person, and exactly just trying to imagine what it's like for them. So taking away any judgment, not telling them what to do and how they should do things, and why as well. Why are they feeling like that? Why can't they do this? So it's to just sort of maybe sometimes not even say anything, but just be with the client, be with the person.
And one of the great advantages of coming to somebody like you who's out of the normal family unit, out of the work environment, you're somebody who's going to be completely independent and actually be able to help on a confidential level. And that's one of the challenges, isn't it? We were talking in the break there about people opening up and having that emotional intimacy with another individual when you've been with them for some time. How do you as a therapist create that kind of trust in a relationship in a relatively short time that you have?
I try and get the balance between sort of being, using empathy as the sort of foundation, and the sort of client to therapy contact and connection, but also I challenge, the client in particular ways. So it teaches them structure and discipline, but also they trust in the relationship as well, that I'm there and it comes from a particular place, like a healthy place and a caring place, as opposed to from a critical place where they may have been used to in their family sort of environment. But most of the time, I think with people come into therapy, it's exactly that, because they come in because they want a connection with someone, but also it's a confidential service. So and it's totally confidential, where they can say what they want and they know that they're guaranteed that nothing goes outside of the room.
Now, for lots of people, they will see going to see a therapist. In Britain, we still haven't kind of got into that acceptance of seeking therapy. We think that's something for the Americans and for other people, that, we're British, we don't do that kind of thing. So maybe demystify the process a little bit for us. If somebody comes to, say, someone like yourself, what's going to be the process? How does it all start from the moment they walk in and seeing you? What happens?
Well, first and foremost, I think therapy, talking therapies and alternative therapies, the view on that is changing in the UK now. So a lot of people are, I think, because GPs are advocating on that behalf as well. So they'd rather people go to face-to-face talking therapy, psychological therapies first, before they put someone on medication. And they're proving that actually that works better. So it saves someone going on medication and being on long-term medication and addicted to a particular type of medication for their symptoms. But clients normally contact me via phone anyway, or they'll send an email through a directory platform, and then what I'll do is I'll call them, and I usually have like a 10-15 minute consultation with them first and foremost, so they get a sense of who I am over the phone, and I get a connection. So we build that connection beforehand, and then when they come in, then it's about assessments and fact finding, information gathering, and just getting to know the client. And
everybody's different, but people have this, thought that you're going to be lying on a couch and all that kind of stuff, and I know that isn't always the case. So maybe give us an idea of the sort of therapies that you offer once you've done the analysis, once you've done the assessments. What then happens in terms of the treatment? How do you conduct that?
It's based on their need. So depending on, most of the times what I do is I ask the client what it is that they what's the presenting problem, what's the priority, what would they like to deal with first, and if it's something pressing, they come in with different needs and requirements. So they may have underlying issues they need to deal with, but actually the pressing issue is that they have work-related stress. So it's impacted on what's triggered by their sort of childhood upbringing. So what I do is I tackle the sort of priority area first, and we work on that. But the history in the background and the sort of, the fact-finding information, I always do anyway.
Now, some people are a little bit nervous, aren't they? Because they might come to you and think, I want a little bit of help. I recognise things aren't quite as right as they should be. However, I'm a bit nervous of opening this Pandora's box. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to cope with what the therapist actually uncovers when they go into my childhood, when they look at my experiences that I might have even forgotten or somehow put at the back of my mind somewhere. Do you find that people are nervous about that? And in that case, what do you do to allay their fears?
Okay, if they're nervous around that and the fear of exposing sort of Pandora's box, and what I do is I say, well, okay, fair enough, we won't go there. What we'll do is we'll build up to that. So the session's led by the client. It's not led by me. I guide them to specific places, and they make, they form their own links. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, so we're putting together a jigsaw puzzle together, and I sort of guide them to certain pieces, and they pick them up and they put them down. And if they don't want to, then they go to work on another piece of the jigsaw puzzle.
When you're looking after clients, you said there that you do look after, female clients as well as male clients. What do you find different about men that you're having to deal with? This particular show is all about male depression. What is it that's unique about men in the way that, A, the depression manifests itself, and then secondly, how you then deal with it for them?
Well, what's different, I think, with men is that when they come in, they hold a lot of emotion. So they're making that connection with another man as well, which is the first focal point with me. Sometimes, the dynamic is that they'll go and see, a man will see a female therapist, which works better for them. So sometimes it works the opposite. But when they come in, it's like men usually have a lot of emotions, and to talk about their emotions in the therapy room, is like a breaking point. And what I do as well is, if it helps the client, then sometimes I bring my own personal stuff in as well. And that sort of, it equals everything out to actually say, that, they're not the only one, so I will identify with some of the stuff that they come up with.
Now, obviously, one of the challenges that you're going to have with men is the fact that they will come in and there'll be a little bit of bravado, because that's probably what men are known for, isn't it? That's, I don't really need to come here. My wife's told me to come here. I don't think I really need it. But, go on, do your best. How do you deal with that situation?
Well, I get that all the time, and a good example is that, people say, that, when they come in, they go, we do a family history. They go, oh, I had a really lovely upbringing. My parents were there, etc., had a good school. And then we say, okay, well, tell me more about, your family background. And then all of a sudden it comes out, and slowly but surely things sort of filter out. So when someone says that, first and foremost, I'll say, well, actually, maybe it is maybe it is the wife has the issue, and maybe not him, But then, if it's the wife saying that he has the issue, then maybe it's a joint issue, And then with a situation like this, scenario like this, it's most of the time what happens is we come to a certain point and we say, I think your wife needs to come in as well.
And it's interesting, one of the things that always comes across with every professional that we interview on this show is that you've heard it all before. Everyone might come to you thinking they've got a unique set of circumstances, unique conditions, unique ways that this particular depression manifests itself. But I can imagine you've got a tremendously broad level of experience when it comes to different depressions and different individuals.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes the depression is triggered, or it's triggered or impacted by family stuff. So in Southeast Asians, there's a lot of that. The pressure from family and culture and religion, and then the peer pressure. And again, it's that sense of belonging. So to break that down, sometimes it becomes difficult, because what normally happens is that, especially if it's a young South Asian who has this depression and is using drugs or alcohol, the family always want to get involved as well.
And it's interesting you talk about faith there, because faith plays a huge part in this. And there might be some people who have a very strong faith, but feel actually it should be the faith that solves this problem rather than going to a professional therapist like you. What would you say to them?
This is an emotional, so the faith is personal. It's something that, it's an embedded belief. It's a belief, you have certain sets of values, but actually on an emotional side is something completely different, because the emotional stuff is triggered by actually past experiences. And I have, I have Muslim clients who are, sort of very faithful to their religion they're practicing and stuff, but actually have other issues that they come into therapy for.
One of the things that I really wanted to focus on in this show was we recognise there's a tremendous amount of professional help available out there. We're so lucky in the UK that we have a phenomenal National Health Service and we have all of these support services. The trouble is they're only as good as they can be when somebody actually uses them. And we know that there's a huge reluctance, especially in certain communities, to go and seek help. So I want to spend just a few minutes talking about how can we encourage people to go and get help. Let's say there's somebody watching right now and they're concerned about a loved one who they feel is in this spiral that you talked about before. What are sort of things that you think they can do which would encourage their loved ones to go and seek help?
Okay. There are different factors that can influence decisions, and one of them is that if people have, if they have the means to fund their own treatment and their own therapy, then it's quite simple. You can Google, psychological therapies, specific categories in your particular area, and you'll have a drop-down list of a lot of various directories with therapists that you can choose from. So each therapist has their own profile and their specialist areas of work, and then it's about actually it's about putting the groundwork in where you can call some people. Some therapists do provide free consultations, initial consultations, so people can go along. And if they don't connect with that therapist, then they can go and try another one. But if you don't have the means to pay for your own treatment or your own therapy, then you could go to the GP. If you have a drugs or alcohol issue, then you can go to your local drugs and alcohol service, and they have counselling sort of services within their projects.
The thing is that, again, as we said, this is phenomenal, the amount of support that is available. But if people are reluctant, what kind of conversation would you suggest that someone has with a loved one who they know they need that person to go and get help, but they're still reluctant despite maybe seeing this show, or maybe they haven't seen this show and their loved one wants them to go and get help? What words of advice would you give to those loved ones to give them that little bit of a boost of confidence to have that conversation with someone to go and seek help?
I think it's quite a challenging issue because it all depends on the individual who's been affected and how much they need the treatment, because actually you can get all the information, gather all the information and sort of present that, and nothing changes. If the affected person doesn't want to seek treatment, then you can't take the horse to water, really. They have to do it themselves. They have to want to do it themselves. But sometimes I think it's quite harsh, but with drugs and alcohol, and if it's tying into depression, it's quite simple maths for some people, that if you stop using and drinking, then actually your mental well-being will improve. And if that improves, then the likelihood is that you won't be going into depressive states. So it's about sometimes for the loved ones, it's about learning how to implement healthy boundaries with that person.
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, and I really hope that people do seek that help, because there is so much available. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
But unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. I'd like to thank our guest, Mr. Saidat Khan, for coming onto the show to discuss this very important topic of male depression. As you can see, there's a lot of help available out there. But once again, we must stress that should you suffer from any medical problems or health concerns, it's always highly recommended that you contact your doctor or GP, as the Health Show gives you an alternative viewpoint to the health concern being discussed. And if you'd like to find out more about this or any of the subjects that we've discussed on the show or on any of the shows we've been through this season, then do get in touch. healthshow@islamchannel.tv. That's healthshow@islamchannel.tv. Well, all it leaves us to say is join us again next week for another great episode, but goodbye for now.